Welcome to the Deep Dive. We basically take sources you're curious about, dig in, and pull out the key insights. It's really a way to get up to speed efficiently.
Yeah, a shortcut to being well-informed.
Exactly. So today we're looking at Dialogue with My Muslim Friend by the Arab Spinoza. It's from 2025.
Right, and it's this really interesting setup, a conversation between someone who's left Islam and a respected scholar from Al-Azhar University.
And they're tackling some huge topics: faith, reason, morality. It's respectful, but definitely challenging too.
Absolutely. It feels very personal, but the questions are universal. So our mission, I guess, is to really get into the core arguments, understand the main points of tension in their dialogue.
Yeah, understand how these two thinkers approach these fundamental questions about, everything.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. First up is the idea of the prime mover.
Yes. The Muslim Friend kicks things off with something many people have heard of, the watchmaker analogy.
Ah, right. The complexity implies a creator.
Precisely. You see a complex watch, you assume a watchmaker. You see a complex universe, you infer a creator, a first cause, God, in his view. It's a classic cosmological argument.
Okay, makes sense as a starting point. But the narrator, the former Muslim, he doesn't just nod along, does he?
No, not at all. He jumps in with a couple of pretty fundamental challenges. First, he questions the very idea that everything must have a cause. Is that actually proven, or just an assumption we make?
Okay. Questioning the premise.
And then he brings up what philosophers call special pleading. If you say the universe needs a cause, well, why doesn't God need one?
Right. Why the exception? Just saying God is uncaused feels a bit like, making a special rule just for God.
Exactly. It's a kind of logical loophole from the narrator's perspective.
Okay, interesting pushback there. So from the start of the universe, they move to its structure, the fine-tuning argument.
Yeah, the friend brings this up. He points to things like gravity, the electromagnetic force, all these physical constants, and he says their values are incredibly precise. Like if they were just a tiny bit different, life as we know it couldn't exist. So this suggests design, right? Intelligent design.
It's a powerful argument on the surface. How does the narrator respond to that?
Well, he flips it. He says, maybe it's not that the universe was designed for life, but that life simply adapted to the conditions that happen to exist.
Like the puddle analogy you mentioned before we started.
Exactly like the puddle analogy. A puddle fits its hole perfectly, but the hole wasn't designed for the puddle. The water just filled the available space. Life filled the niche the universe provided.
Okay. And he brings in other ideas too.
Yeah, he mentions multiverse theories. If there are, countless universes, maybe even an infinite number, each with different laws.
Then it's not so surprising we're in one that works for us. We couldn't observe it otherwise.
Right. And he adds that actually most of this universe is incredibly hostile to life. Vast empty space, radiation, extreme temperatures. It's not exactly a cozy home throughout.
So it really highlights different ways of interpreting the same data, design versus natural selection or chance within a larger cosmic landscape.
Definitely. Okay, next, they grapple with the idea of the divine test.
This life as a sort of trial period.
Yes, the friend presents the view that life is a test of our moral choices, and divine justice will sort everything out in the hereafter. It provides meaning and a sense of ultimate fairness.
But the narrator sees issues with that logic.
He does. He asks, if God is all-knowing, he already knows how we'll choose, right? So what's the point of the test? It seems predetermined.
And the fairness aspect.
He questions that too. People are born into vastly different situations: poverty, wealth, war, peace. How can it be a fair test if the starting lines are so wildly different?
That's a tough one. And it leads almost directly into the really big one, the problem of evil.
Yeah, the classic dilemma. If God is all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-good, why is there so much suffering?
How does the friend handle that?
He offers the sort of traditional explanations. Moral, evil people hurting each other. That stems from human free will. God gave us choice, and sometimes we choose badly.
Okay, free will explains human actions. But what about earthquakes? Diseases?
Natural evils. The friend suggests these are part of a larger divine wisdom, maybe tests, maybe things we just can't comprehend from our limited perspective.
But the narrator isn't satisfied with that.
No, he really presses on what he calls gratuitous suffering. Things like children suffering from horrible diseases or natural disasters wiping out innocent people. It feels pointless, hard to square with a merciful, all-powerful God. It seems to go beyond just free will or simple tests.
It's a tension that runs deep in theology. And that tension continues when they talk about creation itself, doesn't it?
It does. The narrator asks a pretty fundamental question. Why would a completely self-sufficient God need to create humans? Especially if the purpose is for worship.
Right, human motivations for creating desire, need, loneliness, they don't really apply to a perfect being, do they?
Seems unlikely. So, what's God's motivation? The friend's answer is that creation is how God manifests his attributes. His power, his wisdom, his mercy. They're displayed through what he creates.
How does the narrator take that explanation?
He finds it a bit vague, not really a concrete answer. He leans more towards a naturalistic view where purpose isn't given, it's something humans create for themselves.
Okay, so they've covered God's existence, the universe, suffering, creation. What about guidance? Prophethood comes up next.
Yes. The friend argues that prophets are necessary. Human reason is limited, he says, so we need divine guidance, messengers from God, to show us the right path.
Makes sense from a faith perspective. But the narrator...
He puts his faith, so to speak, in human reason. He points to science, ethical progress, like the abolition of slavery. He argues these show reason is sufficient, that we can figure things out. And he asks, again, why would an omnipotent God need intermediaries anyway? Couldn't God communicate directly if needed?
It's a recurring theme questioning the necessity of traditional religious structures when you start from a purely rational standpoint.
Exactly. Which leads right into the core of reason and morality.
The narrator seems to champion reason as the driving force for moral progress.
Very much so. He argues our understanding of right and wrong evolves through experience, empathy, rational debate, not just static revelation. He uses examples of how moral codes have improved over time.
And the friend insists on a divine framework.
Yes, for him, there needs to be an objective, unchanging moral standard given by God. Otherwise, morality becomes relative and subjective.
But the narrator's counter is
that even if you have revelation, you still need reason to understand it, interpret it, and decide if it's actually moral. So ultimately, reason is the tool you have to use anyway. It's the final arbiter, even when evaluating scripture.
Interesting. Then they discuss fitra. What's that concept?
Fitra is an Islamic idea. It's basically an innate, inborn moral disposition or inclination towards good, towards recognizing God. The friend uses it as evidence. God built this into us.
Like an internal moral compass.
Kind of, but the narrator challenges this too. He points out the huge diversity in moral views across cultures. If it's innate, why isn't it more universal?
Good question. Any other challenges?
He also mentions cases like feral children raised without human contact. They often lack what we consider basic moral understanding, suggesting morality is heavily learned, not just innate. And, he argues, fitra is kind of unfalsifiable. How do you scientifically test for an inborn divine inclination?
Right, it's hard to prove or disprove. Okay, nearing the end of the arguments, they hit Pascal's wager.
Ah, yes, the famous bet. The friend basically suggests, hey, believing in God is the safer option, pragmatically.
If God exists, you win big. If not, you lose little.
That's the gist. But the narrator sees several problems.
Why?
Well, first, it's a false dilemma. It assumes only one specific God or atheism. What about all the other religions? Believing the wrong God could be just as bad or worse.
Reduces the odds significantly.
Right. And maybe more importantly, he argues genuine belief can't really be based on a calculated bet or fear. It feels insincere. True faith has to come from conviction, not just hedging your bets.
Makes sense. Then they touch upon death in the afterlife. The friend finds comfort there.
Yes, tremendous comfort in the idea of ultimate justice in the Islamic afterlife. Wrongs will be righted, virtue rewarded.
And the narrator's view.
More grounded in materialism. He sees consciousness tied to the physical brain. No brain, no consciousness, so no evidence for an afterlife.
And the justice aspect.
He questions how much posthumous justice really means to someone who suffered terribly in this life. For him, the focus has to be on achieving justice and well-being here and now.
A very different focus. Okay, the final point discussed is quite direct, isn't it? The friend asks the narrator, why?
Yeah, why, after leaving Islam, does he keep critiquing it? Why not just move on? It's a very personal question.
And the narrator's justification.
It's quite pointed. He says he can't just move on because certain aspects of Islamic scripture, particularly those dealing with apostasy or non-believers, don't leave him alone. Meaning texts that prescribe punishments. He worries about their potential for literal interpretation, especially by extremists, and feels a responsibility to critique these elements to defend human rights and freedom of thought.
So it's not about animosity, but about the real-world implications of certain doctrines.
That's how he frames it, yeah. A defense of secular values and open discourse.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground from this dialogue. Stepping back, what's the overarching message you take from a dialogue with my Muslim friend?
I think ultimately it's a powerful plea for intellectual honesty and freedom. It champions using reason and evidence to examine even deeply held religious beliefs.
But it does so respectfully.
Absolutely. That's key. It shows you can have profound disagreements, tackle the hardest questions, but still maintain respect and a connection. It really encourages critical thinking about our own beliefs, whatever they are.
So wrapping up this deep dive, we've seen this fascinating clash, or maybe interplay, between faith and reason playing out in a personal conversation. The book clearly aims itself at truth seekers.
Yeah, encouraging that rational discussion, that respect for different views, even when they conflict sharply.
And it leaves us, and you, the listener, with something to think about.
Right. A final thought to sort of chew on.
Which is?
Consider the role of questioning, of critical thinking in your own life. How do you approach your own beliefs, your understanding of the world? Is there real value, do you think, in engaging directly with perspectives that seriously challenge your own, even on things that feel very personal?